What's up guys, it's Cal, and in this video we'll be taking a look at Arcane Mages on the Battle for Azeroth beta. We're going to be looking at their baseline abilities and passives, as well as their talents and PvP talents, and there are some changes. I'd say a moderate amount compared to some of the other classes, but just like my other overview videos, this video is not meant to tell you which talents to pick for the best DPS, or if Arcane is better than the other specs of DPS. This is merely to show you what's to come. So, let's get started. So here are all the baseline abilities for the Arcane Mage. Wait, you probably can't see me very well. Much better. Now, as I said before, there are some changes. Most of the changes have to do with the Arcane Mage's mastery and how it affects some of their abilities, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So this counter spell, not changed at all. 24-second cooldown. This is your interrupt, of course. Spell steal is not changed. You can steal a beneficial magic trick from the target. This effect lasts a maximum of 2 minutes. Remove curse is returning. So this was actually removed in Legion, and it does the same thing as before. 8-second cooldown, you remove all curse effects from a friendly target, but it's returning, which is nice. Blink is unchanged, 15-second cooldown, you teleport forward 20 yards or until you reach an obstacle, and it also frees you from all stuns and everything like that. Displacement is also unchanged, 30-second cooldown, it teleports you back to where you last blinked from and resets the cooldown on blink, only usable within 10 seconds of blinking. I think your artifact weapon made that more than 10 seconds or whatever. Not 100% sure on that. I think it did. But of course we won't have artifact weapons anymore in BFA, so that is a 10-second baseline. Frost Nova is unchanged, 30-second cooldown, blasts enemies within 12 yards of you, 4 frost damage, and freezes them in place for 8 seconds. Damage may interrupt the freeze effect. And then there's Arcane Explosion, which had some effects removed from it, so it still causes an explosion of magic around the caster, dealing some arcane damage to all enemies within 10 yards. Now it had a second effect, which increased its damage due to your mastery, but your mastery actually no longer affects Arcane Explosion, so your mastery no longer increases Arcane Explosion's damage. And then it had a third effect that had to do with its mana cost increased dependent on your how many arcane charges you had or something, and it was increased by 125%, something like that. Well, that effect has also been removed. So those two effects are removed. It still generates 1 arcane charge if anything is hit. And then there's Presence of Mind, not changed at all. 1 minute cooldown still, causes your next 2 arcane blasts to be instant cast. Arcane Power is also not changed. 1.5 minute cooldown. For 10 seconds, you deal 30% more spell damage, and your spells cost 30% less mana. Polymorph not changed. We know what polymorph is. You can turn someone into a sheep, a cat, a compy. Well, you will be able to in BFA. There's a glyph that you can get that turns them into a compy. But yeah, it's CC. Only works on beasts, humanoids, critters. Not changed. Time Warp, of course, not changed. 5 minute cooldown. This is, you know, Bloodluster Heroism. Increases everyone's haste by 30% for 40 seconds. Everyone in your party and raid. And then allies get the exhaustion debuff, whatever that is. Slow Fall is not changed. Slows a group member's falling speed for 30 seconds. And then Slow is also not changed, so this still reduces the target's movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. Now, Arcane Barrage did have a bit of a nerf to it, so it still has a cooldown based off of your haste. I think the base cooldown was actually reduced on it, not 100% sure on that, don't quote me on that, but I believe so. It still launches bolts of arcane energy at the enemy target, causing some arcane damage. Now, its second effect, for each arcane charge, deals 34% additional damage. On live, that's a base of 60%, but your mastery can make that go above 60%. So in BFA, it's a base of 30%, so it's halved, and then your mastery makes it go above 30%. And then its third effect hits 1 additional nearby targets for 40% of its damage. On live, it's 50%, so that was nerfed down to 40%. And it still consumes all arcane charges. And then there's Arcane Blast, which had just some slight change to it. So it still blasts targets with energy, dealing some arcane damage, but each arcane charge increases damage by 68%, you know, that's based off your mastery, and mana cost by 100%. On live, that's 125%. So that 125% went down to 100%. And then this third effect to it is new. So it reduces cast time by 8%. That is per arcane charge. Now that third effect used to be a talent called Temporal Flux, which Temporal Flux is no longer a talent. I'll get to that when I get to the talents. So they just baked that into Arcane Blast. Except Temporal Flux, I think, was 5%, reduces cast time by 5% per arcane charge. So in BFA, it is buffed to 8%, which is nice. And it still generates 1 arcane charge. Then there's Arcane Missiles. So this was also slightly changed like the rest of your arcane damaging abilities. So it still launches 5 waves of arcane missiles at an enemy over some seconds based off your haste, causing a total of some arcane damage. But it had a second effect, which was removed. So the second effect increased damage per arcane charge, and that was based off your mastery. You know, your mastery increased that, but your mastery no longer affects arcane missiles, so that effect was removed. It also had a third effect, which was removed, which each damaging spell had like a 15% chance to activate arcane missiles. That was removed. And then there's Prismatic Barrier, not changed at all, still 25-second cooldown, shields you with an arcane force, absorbing some damage and reducing magic damage taken by 15% for 1 minute. The duration of harmful magic effects against you is reduced by 25%. So, as I said, not changed. Greater Invisibility, also not changed, 2-minute cooldown. You can become invisible for 20 seconds, removes all threats, and any action taken cancels the effect, and then you still take 60% reduced damage while invisible, and for 3 seconds after repairing. Ice Block's not changed, 4-minute cooldown. You know, it's your main defensive cooldown. You turn into an Ice Block for 10 seconds. You're invulnerable from all attacks. You also cannot move or do any damage, and then it causes Hypothermia, which is the same on live, prevents you from recasting Ice Block for 30 seconds. And then Arcane Intellect is returning. So this was removed way back in Cataclysm. Now it's returning. A lot of classes are actually getting their class buffs back. Mages are one of them, and that's Arcane Intellect, which is awesome. You know, that's super exciting for mages. It infuses the target with Brilliance, increasing their intellect by 10% for 1 hour, which is what it did way back then. If target is in your party or raid, all party raid members will be affected. So it's a raid buff. Evocation, its effect was changed, so it's still a 1.5 minute cooldown, but it will increase your mana regeneration by 750% for 6 seconds. So on live, what it says is it returns 100% of your mana over 5.5 seconds or 6 seconds or something, but now it increases mana regeneration by 750%. It's still channeled though, so it still is that. You still have your teleports here, you still have your portals. There's only 2 listed there because I just made this tune, so it's not going to have all the portals and everything. And if you actually use teleport to Undercity, because as we know in BFA it gets burned down, it teleports you right outside the front gate, which is actually where I am in this video. And if an Alliance Mage uses Teleport Darnassus, well, it teleports them to Darkshore instead, overlooking Darnassus burning. Conjure Refreshment is of course not changed, 15-second cooldown. You can make food. Now let's take a look at the passive abilities. So 2 passive abilities. Clear Casting is new actually. So what Clear Casting does is for each 500 mana you spend, that sounds weird, I feel like it should say for every 500 mana you spend. Anyways, you have a 1% chance to gain Clear Casting, making your next Arcane Missiles or Arcane Explosion free and channel 20% faster. Now remember, there is a giant stat squish in BFA, so everyone at 120 has a base of 100k mana, which is of course increased for Arcane Mages based off your mastery. So speaking of mastery, your mastery has kind of been changed. Well, not really. So the first effect is still the same, increases your mana regeneration rate and maximum mana by some % based off your mastery. But then the second effect, I think like affected all of your arcane abilities, or pretty much all of them on live. Now it just affects Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage. So Arcane Charges increase the damage of Arcane Blast by some %, and then Arcane Barrage by about half of that %. So now let's take a look at the talents, and then I'll also go over PvP talents in case you care about those. So for the first tier, Amplification was changed, so it actually affects Clear Casting now. When Clear Cast, Arcane Missiles fire 1 additional missile. Rule of Threes actually used to be an artifact trait, now it's a talent, but it's actually, I think, like completely changed from what the artifact trait was. So what it does now is when you gain your 3rd Arcane Charge, the cost of your next Arcane Blast or Arcane Missiles is reduced by 100%. So what this did on your artifact weapon is you used to have a 33.3% chance to fire 3 additional Arcane Missiles. As you see, it's not that at all. And then Arcane Familiar is completely unchanged. 10-second cooldown, you summon a familiar that attacks your enemies and increases your maximum mana by 10% for 1 hour. The level 30 tier. Mana Shield is not changed at all. Prismatic Barrier has no cooldown, but your mana is drained by 20% of the damage it absorbs. Now, Shimmer did have a nerf to it. So Shimmer was always just, it replaces Blink, but it was pretty much just like Blink with 2 charges. It does the same thing, teleport you 20 yards forward unless something is in the way. You know, same thing with Blink. It just has 2 charges. I feel like it's a kind of significant nerf to Shimmer is it has a 20-second recharge versus on live it's 15-second recharge. The reason that's kind of a big deal is because Blink already has a 15-second cooldown. So picking Shimmer will increase Blink's cooldown, but it does give you that second charge. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. And then there's Slipstream, which does about half of the same thing. So its second effect, as you see there, evocation can be channeled while moving. That's the same on live. It is not changed at all. And then the first effect, clear casting, allows arcane missiles to be channeled while moving. You know, on live, this just allowed you to cast arcane missiles while moving, but now, if you pick it, while clear casting, you know, that affects arcane missiles. And then we have the level 45 tier, which is actually not changed at all. So, Incanters flow, not changed. Magical energies flow through you while in combat, building up to 20% increased damage and then diminishing down to 4% damage, cycling every 10 seconds. And then there's Mirror Image, not changed. 2-minute cooldown, creates 3 copies of you nearby for 40 seconds, which cast spells and attack your enemies. And then there's Rune of Power, also not changed. 40-second recharge, places a Rune of Power on the ground for 10 seconds, which increases your spell damage by 40% while you stand within 8 yards of it. Then the level 60 tier, which just had like one small change to it, and it's to Resonance. So Arcane Barrage deals 15% increased damage per target hit. On live, that's 25%. So it did have a nerf to it, but that is the only change to the level 60 tier. So charged up, not changed. 40-second cooldown immediately grants you 4 arcane charges, and then Supernova is also not changed. 25-second cooldown pulses arcane energy around the target, enemy or ally, dealing some arcane damage to all enemies within 8 yards, knocking them upward. A primary enemy target will take 100% increased damage. And then we have the level 75 tier, which is actually also not changed at all. So Chrono Shift is not changed, passive. Arcane Barrage slows enemies by 50% and increases your movement speed by 50% for 5 seconds. Ice Ward is also not changed. Frost Nova now has 2 charges. And then Ring of Frost is, as I mentioned, also not changed. 45-second cooldown, you summon a Ring of Frost for 10 seconds, and then any enemy that walks into it and then leaves it gets frozen. It has a limit of 10 enemies. And then we have the level 90 tier. So Reverberate is new. If Arcane Explosion hits at least 3 targets, it has a 50% chance to generate an extra arcane charge. So there's that. And then there's Touch of Magni, which probably looks familiar to some of you arcane mages, because Touch of Magni was on your artifact weapon. It was an artifact trait, so they changed it into a talent. And it pretty much does the same thing. Just as like one minor change to it. So Arcane Blast has a 10% chance to apply Touch of Magni, accumulating 20% of the damage you deal to the target for 8 seconds. On live, that artifact trait is 6 seconds, and then exploding for that amount of arcane damage to the target and all nearby enemies. And then Nether Tempest is not changed. So it's instant, places a Nether Tempest on the target, which deals arcane damage over 12 seconds to the target, and then some more arcane damage to all enemies within 10 yards, limits 1 target, and then damage is increased based off your mastery. So your mastery does increase the damage of Nether Tempest still. And then we have the final tier. So Overpowered is not changed. Arcane Power now increases damage by 60% and reduces mana cost by 60%. And then we have Time Anomaly. So this used to actually be an honor talent, but they switched that honor talent into making it an actual talent. And it just has like one minor change to it. So I actually kind of like this talent. It's pretty interesting. It says at any moment on live, the honor talent says 5%. But anyways, it says at any moment you have a chance to gain Arcane Power for 10 seconds, which is the same as the honor talent, or gain Evocation for 1 second, or gain 4 arcane charges. So I think that Evocation part is new to Time Anomaly. And then there's Arcane Orb, which is not changed at all. 20-second cooldown, launches an Arcane Orb forward from your position, traveling up to 40 yards, dealing some arcane damage to enemies it passes through. And it grants 1 arcane charge when cast, and every time it deals damage. So those are the talents. Now let's take a look at the PvP talents. So if you don't know how PvP talents work, this is how it goes. You have these 4 bubbles here. This first bubble is the same for all classes and all specs. It is Adaptation, Relentless, and Gladiator's Medallion. They all do the same thing as on live. You get to pick between one of these. They're all in the first tier on live, but as you see, it's no longer on a tier system. So these next 3 bubbles are a giant pool of your already existing PvP talents. You can pick between 3 of any of these. They just pruned a few of them off. But anyways, if there were like 3 that you really liked on live that were on the same tier, you can pick them in BFA. As long as they weren't pruned off, of course. As far as changes go to them, there really haven't been much changes to the PvP talent. There's just one new PvP talent, and then one other PvP talent that was changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the names off of them. I'm going to mouse over them, read the names, and then if you want to know what they do, you can pause the video, or you can look at your Arcane Mage. But anyways, going through it, Arcane Empowerment is new. So this actually applies to clear casting, so since clear casting is new, it makes sense that Arcane Empowerment would be new. So clear casting can now stack 2 additional times and increases the damage of arcane missiles by 5% per stack. Clear casting no longer reduces the mana cost of Arcane Explosion. So this one's also kind of like a double-edged sword. It has a good and then has a bad. And then there's Torment of the Weak, which was changed. So it's a passive still, increases the range of slow by 15 yards and affects up to 2 additional nearby targets. I think on live it like increases your damage by 15% against targets that are slowed, but it doesn't do that anymore. It was changed. And then there's Master of Escape, Rewind Time, Mass Invisibility, Netherwind Armor, Temporal Shield, Dampened Magic, Kleptomania, Prismatic Cloak. And those are all the PvP talents as well as all of the normal talents. And there you have it, all the changes to Arcane Mages coming in the Battle for Azeroth pre-patch, which is coming on July 17th. That has been confirmed. So I'm curious to know what you guys think. Do you like these changes or do you hate them? You can let me know in the comments below, but if you guys enjoyed this video, then you can leave a like on it. You can sub to the channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.